Okay, let me start by thanking the Kripke Centre for mounting this fantastic event. It's great to have so many good folks in town, be able to discuss these things, which a few of us sort of get obsessed with more than we probably should do, but we do, and so that's all cool. Okay, so let me tell you what I want to talk about. But let me give a bit of historical background. So, this is the paper we're talking about, and this is the person who wrote it, I guess, unless it's Schmidt. I don't know. But Saul's paper really was a game changer. Okay, we've been discussing the liar paradox. People have been discussing the liar paradox for 2,500 years, and there's never really been a consensus on the solution in 2,500 years, which is kind of strong. However, after about 1920, there was a sort of orthodoxy. The sort of orthodoxy was a Tarskian solution, even though Tarski himself said this was not a solution. But most logicians after that seem to think it has to be something like a Tarskian solution. There are hierarchy meta languages. Thought to, yeah, because there wasn't really anything better. And so between, say, 1930 and 1975, there was this sort of orthodoxy. It wasn't a unanimity by any means, but if there was a sort of more common view, then yeah, the Tarskian view was the right view. And Saul's paper blew that orthodoxy away. And I remember, because I was around at the time, so I saw it happen very fast. And the reason why it's kind of interesting, because Saul criticized the Tarskian account, and then he produces this sort of recursive construction with fixed points at which the liar sentences and things like it have a true gap and so on. Now, in some sense, none of that was new, because the criticisms of Tarski were well known. Okay, a lot of people had fingered the liar paradox as being defective because of the infinite regress that it generates, and as we were talking earlier, even this sort of recursive fixed point construction was known before Saul, and Saul points all this out in his paper. Yet, I mean, the force of Saul's paper just was like a tsunami of the intellectual aspect, because, I mean, he just put these things in such a sort of a way that it was hard to sort of, all these things struck me with a force that they'd never been struck by before. And of course, being Saul, it was technically really beautiful and tight and so on. So that's why it really was a game changer. Now, Saul was working in a context whereby when you make the construction, at the fixed points, things like the liar come out as an arbitrary force. So, I mean, exactly how you figure that out, Saul has a number of suggestions, but it's sort of standardly K3-ish or something like that. But within just a couple of years, it was realized that you could actually dualize the construction to essentially the same thing. But at the fixed points, the paradoxical on ungrounded sentences came out as both true and false rather than arbitrary. So it was clear already that, it just looked at the construction. You could play the gap side of the street, or you could play the flat side of the street. All right. And both sides have been endorsed. Of course, I've endorsed one side. Other people have endorsed the gap side. I mean, I think it's true to say that the gap side becomes more popular than the flat side still. But for what it's worth, I mean, I think most of the work since 75 has been on. Now, let me put it this way. I personally think that the major debates between the gap view and the gap view nowadays, I don't expect that to be agreed with in this audience. That's fine. That's just my view. But certainly, the discussion between gaps and gluts has played a major role in the literature since '75. And I mean, I've been arguing with Hartley about this for a long time now. But I'm not going to go into that because that's not far too big an issue to take on here and now. So what I'm going to do with this, I've endorsed the glut view, and lots of people are shot at, and that's fine, because most philosophers would expect to be shot at. In my experience, there are two objections to a glut view that keep coming up, and coming up, and coming up, a bit like a bad meal. I've never found them particularly persuasive, and I really want to, say why. Again, now, you might have global objections to dialetheism. Contradictions can't be true, end of story. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that. A solution, a glut solution to the paradox of self-reference is just one application of dialetheism. It's not the only application. It might only be the best application, but it's the one that's got most of the airtime in the last 40 years. And I'm not going to talk about global objections to dialetheism. I'm going to talk about local objections, and the two objections I just mentioned are both local objections. So these are objections to the dialectic solution of the live paradox as such. So here's where we're going. You've just had the introduction. Now, the two objections that I have in mind are first concerning paradoxes, and secondly concerning expressibility and irreverence. And you find both of these in literature, but also when I talk to people informally, these are the first two objections that always come up. Okay, so even though I've said what I think about these to a certain extent before, obviously I haven't been very persuasive. Well, he said, read it, who knows? So I just hope I'm going to have better luck with this more enlightened audience this time. All right, so here we go. So, first problem is to do with Carrot's paradox. And I'm kind of assuming you'll know what that is, right? The liar paradox is about the sentence, which, okay, it expresses its own line truth. The notation standard, I'm not explaining, especially in this audience. The Carrot's paradox concerns a different sentence. So it concerns a sentence C which says, hey, if I'm true, then fill in the blank. And you can fill in the blank with anything you damn well like. All right. Now, given the liar sentence, you can deduce contradiction. Okay? Given the Carrot sentence, you can deduce A, whatever A is. Okay? So those are the two paradoxes. Now, the objection goes like this. Dialetheism doesn't solve the Carrot paradox. The liar and the carrier are of the same kind, so it doesn't solve the liar either. Okay? This is the standard objection. Now look, first of all, dialetheism does not solve the Carrot paradox. That's true. Supposing that something is both true and false doesn't help one iota. And I also think that the same kind of paradox should have the same kind of solution. It's something I call the principle of uniform solution elsewhere. So the question is, are they of the same kind, the liar and the carrier? Okay, that's the crucial issue. And I'm gobsmacked by people saying, but it's obvious. They're obviously of the same kind. It's not at all obvious. So you say to people, well, why do you think they're of the same kind? And they say, wow, they both use self-reference, don't they? Yeah, so, look, there are paradoxes that use self-reference that have absolutely nothing to do with often not of the liar kind. Okay, you've met most of you the surprise exam paradox before. So a teacher tells the students there'll be a surprise exam next week. you don't know what it will be. Okay, there's a well-known way of phrasing this self-referentially. Namely, the paradox is there'll be a surprise exam next week, and you cannot deduce from this statement when it will be. You cannot deduce from this statement. What self-reference? Okay, so self-reference, they'll tell you the paradox are the same kind. Then people will say, yeah, but it doesn't involve truth, does it? There'll be a surprise exam next week, and you cannot deduce from the truth of this statement when it will be. Oh, okay. All right. So that's no good. So you say, well, okay, that's self-reference doesn't really help much. Self-reference truth doesn't really help much. So why are they of the same kind? The next move in the game is something like this. Look, you can define not A as A arrow bottom. And if you do that, well, then the negation of C is TC arrow bottom, and that's an instance of a carry, right? So therefore, they're the same kind of paradox. And I think people find this a bit persuasive. Now, let's think about this. There is an issue about whether this is a kosher definition of negation. There's a lot to be said about that, and I might say a little bit more, but generally speaking, I'm going to invent suicide. Because there's a much more fundamental flaw with this argument, which is this. A paradox is an argument, it's not a sentence. So even if this is a version, even if that's the liar sentence, the Curry paradox, the fact that the liar and the Curry are deductions of the same sentence does not mean they're the same argument. Because paradoxes are not sentences, they're arguments. Look, Donald Trump was a child in 2021. There's nothing paradoxical about that. That's absolutely false. Here's a paradox of which that's the conclusion. Donald Trump was a child in July 1946. If one is a child at a time, one is a child 1 month, 1 second, 1 day later. Okay, that's a paradox, and you know it, all right? So a paradox is not a sentence. A paradox is an argument. And so the question is, even if this definition of negation is right, is the Curry argument and the liar argument, are they the same arguments? All right. Let's think about that some more. Now look, I don't think it's really possible to give a very definitive answer to this question, just because we don't really have a very good account of when two arguments are the same argument. It's clear you can take an argument, you can fiddle with it a bit, and it doesn't change the argument, but we very often give quite different arguments for one of the same conclusion. I mean, we know many proofs of the first Gödel incompleteness, so they're clearly different arguments. So what's a really good criterion for difference of arguments? Look, I have got a good answer for that. I don't think anybody else has. And without such a thing, I don't think you can really give a definitive answer to the question of whether the Curry and the liar are different arguments. But just look at it. It's not very plausible that the same. So let's think about the liar argument, the Curry argument, and see whether they look the same. So for a start, they've got different conclusions. So the conclusion of the liar is a contradiction. The conclusion of the Curry can be anything. It can be Canberra is the federal capital of Australia. They've got different conclusions. How can they be the same argument? indeed, if you think about it, what is the paradox of the code? And it's not that you can deduce something false or something contradictory, because you can deduce that Canberra is the federal capital of Australia, and that's true. The paradox is not what you deduce. The paradox is you should damn well not be able to prove it that way. That's what's paradoxical about the code. Okay. So there's a way of making all this precise using something called the enclosure schema, which shows that the lyre and its ilk fit the enclosure schema, the code does not, because there's something different going on with that, an arbitrary conclusion. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that. We can talk about it in the discussion if you want to. Okay, so that's kind of first look at these arguments, and it should be enough to make you start thinking on one. Okay, let's look at the arguments in more detail. Now, exactly how you phrase the arguments does depend on your regime of proof. You know, whether you're using natural deduction or sigma code or whatever. To some extent, the argument is going to be hostage to how you formulate your regime of proof. But let's just sort of set the sort of niceties aside for a moment and just think about the way they're normally formulated. Okay, so this is the lyre. You start with the T schema. Then you know what L is, so that gives you that biconditional. And then by excluding middle and disjunction evaluation, you get that. That's a sort of simple canonical argument for the lyre. What's the sort of canonical argument for parity? Well, it goes something like this. There's our friend the T schema. That's substituting what we know C to be. Then you've got contraction. Okay. You can go from two occurrences of an antecedent to one occurrence. And then that's modus ponens right to left on this guy using this. And then modus ponens using these two, you get A. Do those look like the same argument? I mean, I've already commented on the fact they've got different conclusions, but it's worse than that. I mean, because, look, they've got different inferences. This uses excluding middle, this uses contraction. They've even got different bloody connectives. Look, I know I've formulated this. Whoa, sorry about that. I know I've formulated a lyre with a conditional. You don't need it. As I said this morning, by deducibility will do. In which case, you don't need the conditional to formulate the lyre argument. You certainly do for the code, because the code contains a conditional. So you don't even use the same connectives. Okay, look, you can sort of try and get around some of these problems. For example, okay, they've got different conclusions. But suppose you add an application of one instance of explosion to this, you can deduce anything you like, right? So if you're allowed to do that, then at least they have the same conclusions. But hey, why bring in explosions? No one ever did that until the 20th century. Look, logicians have been discussing the lyre for 2,500 years, and the explosion did not bigger impact until the 20th century. In fact, explosion is not even taken to be a valid principle of inference until at least the Middle Ages, the Latin Middle Ages, and even then, it's not. I mean, there are many formulations of the lyre in medieval logic, and I've met many of them, and I've never met one which uses explosion. So explosion is not an integral part of the lyre paradox. So you can't even get around the first problem by saying that well, if you had explosion on, at least you got the same conclusions, because that's just expression is not integral to the liar paradox. Never has been. All right. So, they don't really look like the same argument. Okay. Now it gets a bit more interesting. Let's come back to this thought that you can define negation as arrow bottom. That gets us a little closer. So suppose you can define negation as arrow bottom. Okay, then let's have a look at this argument. So this is the curry. There's the biconditional. There's we substituting what we know C to B. Then we contract and we get that, which is not TC. And then we use modus ponens skills, and then we get one. So that's the curry argument. And now we're getting close to the line because this is TC and that's extinction. So never mind the bottom guy, we've deduced the liar sentence and extinction if this is the line. Okay, so at least we're getting closer, but we're not there. Because first of all, there is a question of whether not B can be defined as arrow bottom. And I'm not going to discuss that because that's an involved question, and we could talk about that the rest of the hour, which I'm not going to. But certainly, in some logics you appear to, some logics you can't. So this is at least contentious. But let's agree you can define it, just for the sake of argument, see where it goes. Again, what that means is the liar sentence and this instance of the curry sentence are the same sentence. But as you now know, paradox is not a sentence, it's an argument. Okay. And having the same conclusion does not mean that the two arguments have the same conclusion. It does not mean they're the same argument. You've been over that. If you look at this, it still doesn't like the canonical liar argument. It uses contraction, whereas the canonical line uses excluding middle, and vice versa. So it's starting not to look like the liar. Even worse, it ain't the curry, because the curry paradox, you don't need bottom in the language. You can substitute anything for the kind of rebarbative conclusion, rebarbative consequence. Okay, even without bottom, you get a paradox that you can deduce, for example, that Canberra is the federal capital of Australia. Okay, so even if this is the negation of C, this is not Curry's paradox, because Curry's paradox, you've got an A here, okay? And yet this turned on lambda playing a special role, not enough to react. Okay, well, of course there's always more to be said about these things, but given the time, I'm going to sort of move to the second. All right, so that's the first objection. Liar and Curry are the same kind of paradox. Dialetheism doesn't solve the curry, so it doesn't solve the liar. Okay, that's the first objection. Let's move to a second objection, which is really quite different. Although again, I read it all the time in literature, and people say to me, but hey, how does the objection come? All right, so solutions to the paradox of self-reference, including the liar, typically strike the problem of revenge paradoxes, as I'm sure you all know. So a revenge paradox is it's kind of marshals the very machinery which is being suggested to solve the paradox. But the machinery kind of, talking Australian, you should throw a boomerang and it comes back and hits in the back of the head, right? So the machinery rebounds on the putative solution to give you another paradox or a bang on the head or something, right? In fact, often it's not clear that it's really different paradox. It's just the same paradox in the new direct context. But leave that aside, go on paradox. Okay, so uncontentiously, many solutions, consistent solutions to life paradox are subject to this phenomenon. I'm not telling you they're on the way down of it, but it's very hard to simply. Okay. So if we think about the liar, and let's just think about a kind of Saulish, or at least a fine-ish solution, which says that, look, exactly how you phrase this is contentious, and Hartley never likes the way that I put it, but roughly it's the liar sentence is the truth value gap, okay? It ain't true. So, all right, your solution is that it's a truth value gap, it ain't true. But hey, if it ain't true, then to say that it ain't true, it ain't true. So this is a bit like we were talking about the revenge paradox in the case of the Reinhardt. Okay, this is another example of the same phenomenon, because I'm giving you a story about what happens, and I'm telling you something, and it ain't true, because I'm telling you that the liar sentence is not true, but that's exactly that. So what I'm telling you is not true. So that's the revenge problem for a gap theorist. Okay. So people say, hey, Graham, yeah, that's right, but we all suffer from revenge, so do you. Okay? Because a Galat solution suffers from revenge problem too. Okay, why? Well, if you're a gap theorist, your problem is there's something you can't express, namely untruth. Similarly, the argument goes, if you are a Galat theorist, there is also something you can't express. And it's, well, it can be truth only, falsity only, classicality, non-classicality. These are all interdefined. Okay, let's just focus on one of them. The argument's going to be the same, more or less, however you take the thing that is to be inexpressible. So what you cannot express, according to this objection, is that it's false only. Okay. So the revenge argument goes, hey, you want to be able to express the thought that something is false only. Now, what's the revenge paradox? Well, it's a paradox that says this sentence is false only. Right? Namely false and not true. Okay. Let's do a little bit of sort of figuring. What's the status of this damn sentence? Okay, I'll leave you to play with the details later. I'll tell you the answer. The answer is it's true, it's false, and it's not true. As so, it's paradoxical, it's true and false, and it's false only. Hey, that's a contradiction, isn't it? Gotcha. Okay, look, that's not, because, if you're doing a gap solution and you're stuck with a contradiction, that's a problem. But the Galat solution was never meant to get rid of contradictions. It was meant to, how do you put it, tame them, okay? To show how you can have these things without them blowing up in your face. Now, getting rid of explosion is a first necessity, but it's not the only necessity. What you need is some kind of model to show you that the contradictions you've got don't go haywire. But you can do that for this case. Okay? We know that contradictions of this kind are under control. You know, you can use various scripting models to show that this is unproblematic. But you can't prove that unfrog correctly. It just does not follow that a glut theorist cannot express being false only. They can express it just like that. What they dialetheist can't do is express being false only consistently. Okay, that's important because it's not that you can't express it, you can't express it consistently. And then the standard move that you can read in the literature, which was this. We intended it to be consistent. Well, did you now? Okay. It's not good news that sometimes what you intend can't be done. Remember Freud. I have no doubt he intended basic law 5 to be consistent. So this is, you know, pretty hard. You can, a glut theorist can express false only. It's inconsistent, but then, you know, that's what you'd expect because you're mixing truth and negation. So that's the kind of first link of the argument. So, what happens then in the dialogue? Well, it goes something like this. Hey, but Graham, you said, have you, that you can use classical logic in a consistent situation. And if you've got a consistent inconsistent situation, all hell breaks loose. Okay? So it turns ad hominem, which is really the best kind of argument because it's hardest to get out. So, look, it's true that I have said things like C. If A is true, only the disjunctive syllogism can be used. And the disjunctive syllogism is kind of important because if you take, say, LP or many paraconsistent logic and you add the disjunctive syllogism, you get classical logic back. So if you got disjunctive syllogism, you can reason with it. And so I've said things like this in a discussion of what's called classical rejection. And you can get classical logic back. So if C is true, then you seem to have a brain because suppose you've got something that's consistent, not true only, not false, but so either true only or false only, but inconsistent. So if it's inconsistent, you've got A, you've got not A, but since it's consistent, you've got the disjunctive syllogism, and so you all have breaks. All right. Now, I've discussed this at length, but the thought is that when you have the disjunctive syllogism, you get it as a default inference. So it's no good simply adding a premise which says the situation is inconsistent. Because if the situation is inconsistent, adding a premise that it's consistent ain't going to make it consistent. It's going to make it more inconsistent, right? So you can't simply suppose you can recapture the syllogism enigmatically by adding a premise that's consistent. That won't do. So the strategy has always been that you can recapture it as a default assumption. Namely, you assume classicality until and unless proved otherwise. Okay. The story is that DS is a default inference. What does that tell you about this conditional? It tells you this conditional is a ceteris paribus conditional. So it's true. The conditional is true ceteris paribus. So it's non-monotonic because ceteris paribus conditionals are non-monotonic, as you know, because ceteris paribus conditionals don't satisfy antecedent strength. So you can have this, but if you strengthen the antecedent to saying it's to give you an inconsistency, this is no longer true. Okay, now that's what I've said in the past about this, and I stand by that. Okay, but the last thing I want to talk about is that we have discovered another way of approaching the situation, which had never occurred to me before. When I say we, this is in a paper written by myself and Hitachi Mori and Zach Weber. And we wrote it a couple of years ago. It hasn't appeared yet, but it's stuck in the pipeline on manuscripts. And to be honest, I should say that it was Hitachi who discovered CUNY. Okay? So really the credit for this should go to Hitachi. All right. So how do you express consistency? How do you get classical recapture back without things blowing? Okay, and this solution has absolutely nothing to do with default rules. So, how does it go? Well, look, let's suppose you're working LP. In fact, this argument will work in virtually all paraconsistent logics. Versions of it may well work for paracomplete logics as well, but that's another story. Just think about proposition LP for a moment. You can extend this to first order LP, makes no difference. And let's suppose that you express consistency with this ball operator. So ball A means A is consistent, from which you can find German balls and now, sort of flat-footed way of defining the semantics of ball operator is that if A is true or worm, if A is true or false only, then it's true, then it's consistent. But if A is both, then it's false and it's consistent. Okay? So that is the flat-footed way of doing it. Okay, doesn't work. And why not will be obvious to you. You probably met it already, but even if you haven't, you'll figure it out if you think for 5 minutes. Because you can use consistency, but the ball operator to define this dagger of death, the death of A, right? Which says that A is false and it's consistent. And you can easily prove that you've got excluded middle and explosion through dagger. So you define it. And if you've got Boolean negation and a T-schema, guess what? You've got a dagger of death liar. And because you've got explosion and excluded middle, all hell breaks loose. So, nice try, isn't it? Okay, now. Hitachi's idea is this. We don't do quite this. This is truth. This ball is a truth functional operator. If you know the input, you know the output. But there's now a branch of logic called non-determinist. And it's been investigated now for a long time. I don't know who first started to investigate this. There's some stuff by Brazilian logicians back in the 80s, and I think a lot of the real hard work has been done by Abram in the last 10 years. There's a whole literature of stuff now. And what we do is go non-deterministic. So, for today's purposes, it's only the ball operator which is going to have non-deterministic semantics. The other connectives behave deterministic. But how does the ball operator work? Well, you need to have non-deterministic semantics. So what this says is if A is true, then non-deterministically, ball A is either T, B, or F. is false, bool A is T pref, and if A is both, this is painful. All the hard work is being done by this index, this entry here. That cannot be non-deterministic if what I'm going to say is to be true. But these guys can be non-deterministic. Now, you may not have met non-deterministic semantics before, so let me just sort of give you the idiot's guide to non-deterministic validity. So, a legitimate evaluation is any deterministic submatrix. So, a legitimate evaluation is a truth function evaluation where you choose one of the non-deterministic outputs. Okay. And an inference is valid if it's truth-preserving or legitimate evaluation. So it just kind of expands your legitimate evaluations to some things you might not have thought you had. Right? So we're going to assume that the Boole operator works like that. Okay, great. Yeah. Do we need to know what you're taking as designated? Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that. T and B. So this is piggybacking on LP, okay? And designated values are T and B. If you're in K3, only T will be designated. I think what I'm going to say still works in that context, but I've actually checked. But anyway, I'm assuming T and B, right? Okay, now, thanks, Mel, I should have said that. Hitoshi's result is that if you take a rule system on axioms, well, a rule system for LP, and you add this guy, the result is sound complete. So now you just add this. This is the only rule of inference you need. Covering this guy. You just add that rule of inference, and the rule system is sound complete. Now, given this, you've got classical recapture immediately, because if you've got this rule, then when you add Boole A to the premises of the disjunctive system, you get B. Okay? Either B is true, or A and not A is true, but then because of this principle, you've got B in. So you've got disjunctive syllogism back, and so you've got classical recapture. You just, whenever you want to insist on consistency, you just add a premise to that effect. And so you can get classical recapture back simply by adding a premise to the fact, to say that the situation, or at least the particular sentence in question, is consistent. You cannot do this on the default assumption, because you cannot simply add an extra premise to get classical recapture back with that. But you can with this. So you've got classical recapture, but mirabile dictum, you don't have explosion, because what you can show is that adding the Boole operator gives you conservative exception. This is kind of gobsmacking. I have to look at the proof every time to remind myself this. Let's take a naive theory of proof, since we're talking about Boole. Let's add Boole to the language and add this as a rule of truth. Okay? This is a conservative extension. Why so? Well, because you can model Boole with this. This says that everything is true. And of course, if everything is true, then you've got a naive theory of truth, everything follows. So, in a sense, you've already got something that works like Boole in your language. Now, let me get clear. I'm not suggesting that you define all like that. That would be silly. What I'm pointing out is the fact that if you define bottom as this, you get a conservative extension, because you can prove anything without the ball, but using the sort of this rule of proof that you could prove before. So that's really nice. You can express consistency with a premise, and you can do that conservatively. I think that's really cool. Now, of course, let's cut some of this stuff. Of course, any move you make is going to have objections. So the first objection that will probably occur to you is that if you do that, then the ball operator can itself behave inconsistently. It can. So that conjunction there is satisfied. I'll let you play around with that so you can see. So is that a problem? What should happen that consistency should behave consistently? In fact, it doesn't, because we've already met this guy. Okay? And in a sense, this expresses consistency, and this expresses inconsistency. So you actually expect consistency to behave inconsistently, which is what it does in these semantics. Okay, that's one objection. Another objection is that indeterminacy is banned. So non-deterministic semantics is, you shouldn't really have it. And you might sort of model Davidson or something and think you get away with it. Actually, to be perfect frank, I've never liked non-deterministic. But I did change my mind then. It's actually showed me this up. Okay. Okay, so then the question is, well, why is non-determinist semantics banned? It's kind of hard to come up with a good argument. Determinism is all right, indeterminism is all over the place in semantic, because look, it's only truth functional indeterminacy. Given the truth value of the input, in some circumstances, the truth value of the output is indeterminate. But truth function semantics are all over. Look, take K in modal logic, it's known that, right? If A is false, then Ka is false. You can't know what is true. Okay? But of course, if A is true, Ka can be true or false. I mean, it just doesn't have true functionalities as possible word semantics or word semantics. So, you should expect some things to be having deterministic truth value semantics. But really, should you expect the ball to have non-deterministic semantics? I don't see why not. Look, let's talk about the truth predicate. What I'm trying to say will offend people who think that the truth predicate is transparent. I don't think it is personally. What I actually think is that in the case where, okay, so there are three values, T, B, and F. In the case where the value is T or F, then if you apply the truth predicate, you get the same amount. But in the case where A is both true and false, then to say that it's true, maybe either B or T. Okay, so if it's both true and false, it's true. Why do you want to say it's false as well? I think one of the reasons why, in general, you don't want to say it's false. because if you do that, you're going to change any dialectic form and name to a contradiction about truth itself. So what you're going to do is generate a lot more contradictions. Now, I'm trying to think that contradiction should not be multiplied beyond necessity. So I think there are good reasons to think that the truth predicate is a kind of consistent item, at least a partial consistency. So if you take a contradiction out of motion, so this thing in motion is both here and not here, to say that it's here is true. Say that it's here and not, it's just true. But sometimes you can't do that. And you can't do that because of things like lie. If you say this sentence is not true, you're going to have to say it's both true and false, and that is what you've just said. So for that special case, if A is the lie sentence, then so is true and lie. And so both can have the value of both true and false. So, so the truth predicate can act as a consistentizer, but maybe most of the time it won't always work because it's going to you're stuck with it in the case of some paradox of self-reference. And you might say, hey Graham, yeah, but I mean, you're dealing with a logical. I mean, truth. I mean, truth. You have a certain amount of limit to truth, because it's not logical constant. Whereas the ball seems to be like a logical constant. So you showed that. Are you sure you can do the same kind of thing? Well, okay. This is what I've just told you, right? That the truth predicate can be a partial consistentizer. Now, I'm not so sure that truth is the logical operator, logical constant. I mean, it's a predicate for sure, but then so is identity. We don't normally balk at taking that a logical constant. And truth certainly seems to have a sort of standard criteria for being a logical constant. I mean, it's topic neutral, applies to anything. This principle seems to be a priori and so on and so forth. And actually, it's quite trying to think that truth is a logical constant and one behaves non-deterministically. And in fact, if you just consider the sentence S that says it's true that it's not consistent, and remember that this guy is non-deterministic, then S is going to have non-deterministic. I'll let you figure out the details. We won't go through it. Okay. So that's the second argument, and I've said why I don't think it's right, because the flat-footed argument that dialectics can't express consistency or truth only is just crazy, because they can, as I've done with just the truth predicate and the falsity predicate. What they can't do is express consistency. They can't express it consistently, and that's another story. But then you do need to say something about classical recapture. I told you how I thought I still have had it with non-monotonic formulas, but this move to non-deterministically is a new idea which I rather like. In fact, that bit of the talk about non-determinism is the only thing that's new in this talk. All the rest I said plenty of times before. Okay, what I've said before hasn't been terribly successful, judging like that, how often these objections still come up in conversation. I don't expect what I say now to settle matters, because philosophers and logicians are kind of counter-suggestive. So you can't do that. Someone can come up with a way to do it. It might be stretched, it might be ugly, but we do it all the time, right? So, I mean, I'm sure that some people will have other objections, maybe in this audience. fine too. So I don't expect this to kind of kill these objections, but I would hope that now they'll start to go away. So anyway, thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to hear your thoughts.